I wanted to make a quick video covering the different sources of bias. Remember when we introduced this topic a few days ago, there were two major concerns we had in bias. One was an undercoverage. This is a kind of a catch-all phrase for any time we feel like our sampling method is going to leave a certain group of people underrepresented. That doesn't mean our sample leaves all females, for example, out, but there aren't nearly as many females as there should be. There are three chief sources of undercoverage. Number one is a voluntary response bias. If we allow the sample to select itself, we run the risk of undercovering those people who don't want to be in the sample. The example I used in class was me putting into the announcements that I was looking for Roosevelt students to take a survey. The problem there is I don't have any freshman classes, and by allowing the students to determine whether or not they want to be in the sample, odds are freshmen are going to be undercovered in this sample. And so under our notes, we'll just say anytime we allow the sample to select itself. We compare that to a non-response bias, and there's a little bit of confusion among students as to what the difference here is. Both of these biases are going to result in an undercoverage, but the difference in a non-response bias is I did not allow the sample to select itself. I selected a sample at random, but only certain people showed up. So instead of putting into the announcements that I'm looking for students to take a survey, I send out a random selection of passes to classrooms to certain students. But the issue, once again, is the freshmen probably are going to ignore the pass because they don't know who I am, or they're nervous about going to a teacher or classroom that they're unfamiliar with. And so once again, freshmen are undercovered. The only difference here is we did select our sample at random, just certain people don't show up. Certain people don't respond. And then this moves into our final bias that results in an undercoverage, and that is a convenience sample. Anytime you're selecting people based on how easy they are to select, odds are you're going to be leaving out a group of people that are important. For example, if I think it's convenient to survey students out during lunch because, well, all the students are mixed up already, the issue here is I'm leaving out students who may not eat lunch on campus, for example, seniors. So this might result in a undercoverage of seniors. So a convenience sample is sampling those who are nearby. Nearby in a convenient sense, not nearby like as in they're just next to you, but they're just students who are easy to get to. So all three of these are going to result in an undercoverage. The last major source of bias is an unreliable response. If we don't really trust the answers we're getting, then certainly that is going to lead to a bias. And the main culprit of an unreliable response is what's known as a response bias. So we'll put this as number 4, response bias. There are lots of different sources of response bias, but anytime we're concerned that the responses we're getting are not truthful, then this is typically referred to as a response bias, and this can lead to this can come from a bunch of different places. We could get a response bias if the question is worded unfairly. And so if we're wording the question in such a way that the people responding feel like they should answer a certain way, then that would lead to response bias. If the people feel pressure to answer a certain way, for example, if I asked a student who was in my class whether they approved of the job I was doing as a teacher, they might feel pressured to answer in the affirmative because I'm the person who controls their grades. And so they might feel pressured to answer the way I want them to answer, or how they perceive I want them to answer. Even something as surreptitious as the person asking the question can result in a response bias. We had talked about the example of a male or a female asking the same question. If a female was asking a question concerning women's rights, then people taking or answering that question might feel pressure to answer in the affirmative because the person asking the question is female. And so this is a quick rundown of the different sources of bias.